If I was to list the many ways in which today's cultural narrative is misdirecting and misshaping our kids, the topic of identity would have to be at the top of the list. This is especially troubling when we realize that the search to figure out who I am is front and center in our kids' lives as they grow through adolescence. Our friend Mike McGarry has written a book to help teenagers know and live out the beautiful reality of finding one's identity as a divine image bearer. Stay tuned as I chat with Mike about leading kids to the truth about who they are on this episode of Youth Culture Matters.
From the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding, this is Youth Culture Matters. If you're a parent, youth worker, educator, counselor, grandparent, or anyone else who cares about kids, we're glad you've joined us for this practical, informative, and hope-filled podcast. This is a place where together we talk and think Christianly about the rapidly changing world of today's children, teens, and young adults.
Well, welcome everybody to another episode of Youth Culture Matters. I'm Walt Mueller here at CPYU, and as always, we're looking for ways to talk about things that are happening in our culture and how the gospel, how the scriptures, how a biblical world and life view speak to those things, because we need to help our kids navigate these issues. And without a doubt, one of the biggest issues, we tell people this all the time right now in today's culture, one of the biggest issues for all of us, regardless of age, especially in a social media saturated world, but for our kids in big ways, the issue is identity. And we talk a lot here at CPYU about identity and how we need to find our identity in who we are as human beings made in the image of God. And then ultimately, as followers of Jesus Christ, we understand that when God looks at us, what he sees is the righteousness of Christ. We're adopted sons and daughters. And what a wonderful thing it is when we focus our ministries on that, not just our youth ministries, but our ministries in the home and in the Christian school, and look for ways to teach. And one of the resources that just has come out from New Growth Press is written by our friend Mike McGarry, who runs Youth Pastor Theologian, and the book is called Iconic: Being God's Image in Your World. And we're going to talk with Mike about that today. So, Mike, welcome. It's good to see you.
Thanks so much for having me. It's good to see you.
We're going to have a little conversation before we get into the book. I have to say, people aren't seeing us; they're hearing us. But I can see you since we record this over Zoom, and you're beaming. You're beaming more than you did the last time we had you on here. And the only thing I can think about is that you think the Patriots are going to win the Super Bowl this year.
I don't think they're going to win the Super Bowl, but I am very happy.
Yeah. This is one of Mike's greatest vices. And when I met him back in, it was 2011, right? Is that where we first met in the classroom?
This is
Hold on. Let's talk about
Walt.
where we met. It was 2011, right? Is that when it all happened? In the classroom, or had we met before then?
Give or take.
Okay. Yeah, so Mike was one of our students at Gordon Conwell in the Doctor of Ministry to Emerging Generations, our first cohort. Yeah. And I think you were probably in the first graduating class from our cohort. I was. Yeah. Did anybody else graduate with you?
I was the second person to defend my thesis because Linda went the day before me.
Linda Leon, that's right. And actually, it makes me feel good because I was the mentor to both of you. So that means I beat the other two guys, Duffy Robinson and Donis Vidu.
You were very happy and proud of that.
I think I'm in last place now, though. We came out of the gate strong, and I don't know what happened. But so Mike was one of our students there, and it was fun to get to know him and to see him. He's a graduate, an MDiv graduate from Gordon Conwell. So we were just talking about this. He was used to the grueling nature of the education that we had there. There was much required of us. And so when he came into the program, one of the things that was very clear early on was his commitment to good theology, and the place of good theology is foundational, not just in our lives, but in the world of youth ministry. So this book is one of the books Mike's written since then, and we're going to get into it. But I want to ask you a couple of questions, Mike. We always try to have a little fun, and I do like to have fun with Chris Wagner, who's in here with me right now, who produces this. He pushes all the buttons and things. But I want to ask about when we talk about identity and teenagers and the struggle for identity, yes, there's a lot of new realities with social media that I'm glad I did not have when I was in high school. I mean, it's fear-inducing to think about, maybe who I would be now and who I would have been then with that. But we still struggled with identity, and so I want to go back. I'm going to ask you guys about your 16-year-old selves.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, so think back to your 16-year-old self. I mean, that might be...
Do I have to?
Yes, you do. And I'm going to force you into this. I don't know. Maybe I'll decide you probably shouldn't have after you answer some of these questions. But, if you think back to your 16-year-old self, let's start with the school cafeteria.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know. What did you guys... How did you feel when you walked into the school cafeteria every day? Did you? Because for me,
other than hungry,
yes. Well, the reason I'm asking is that seemed to be a place when you walked through those doors, you have that imaginary audience that's there, and in your mind you're thinking, and please tell me I'm not alone here. Everyone's looking at me. Who am I? Do I measure up? Do I fit in? That sort of thing. I mean, it's a universal struggle for kids, much more now because the cafeteria is 24/7, right, with social media. But, what were you guys thinking when you walked into the cafeteria, your teenage selves? And I hope this prompts some thinking on all those who are listening to help us understand just how deep and wide this struggle to find identity runs for teenagers. Mike, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think for me in high school, it didn't prompt a ton of anxiety. But I think that's because I was mostly just invisible. So I was never a high attention kid. I always flew under the radar, like everywhere. And so I was a jock and played 3 sports, but I wasn't really a jock. I was in the band, but I wasn't a band kid, a band geek. I helped start and lead a on-campus Bible study.
Was Travis Deans around then? Was he?
Well, I'm sure he was.
That's what Travis does, right? Yeah.
So that was an FCA huddle back in the day in the 90s in Massachusetts. So yeah, I had a very small group of friends and we just did everything together. And I really just didn't pay attention to people outside of my very small group of friends because I just didn't think they really mattered much to me because I didn't really seem to matter much to other people. So outside of my very small and pretty tight-knit friend group, I really just didn't pay much attention beyond that.
Yeah. Your small friend group, let me just ask about that. Did that tend to be the people who were involved in the Bible study with you or
no,
folks from your youth? Okay.
Yeah. No, I mean, part of my story is, like growing up in Massachusetts, even in the 90s, when I describe my group of friends, it sounds like the setup for a really bad joke because there was me, who was a non-denominational evangelical Christian, a few kind of just mainline liberal Protestants, a Catholic, a Jew, an atheist, and a Buddhist. And this was my close group of guy friends.
Yeah.
And that was just totally normal.
And those were the guys that you sat with in the cafeteria pretty much every day? You sat with the same people?
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah. So a few of them were kind of a bit more popular, and so they would kind of float depending on the day. But there were a few of us who kind of just kept to ourselves, and we liked it that way.
Yeah. All right, now this is dangerous. I'm gonna go to Chris because I never know how he's gonna answer. It's always a surprise.
That sort of anxiety-induced, not sure where to sit, trying to find your way kind of thing. I definitely felt that in middle school.
Yeah.
By high school, kind of like Mike, I had found my small little group of friends. I didn't fit well into any necessary categories. I was definitely a nerdy kid. I was in the sports I was in were like long distance track and cross country, so I wasn't really in the jock crowd, even though I did play some sports. So yeah, I just kind of had my own close knit group of friends, and like Mike, we stuck together, and so once I found that group, I kind of felt more confident in who I was and wasn't stressed about where I was going to sit in the cafeteria necessarily. But in middle school, absolutely, I was still feeling the same.
Yeah, same.
Yeah. Yeah, I would.
Yeah, middle school was worse.
I would resonate with that. Mike, you graduated what year from high school?
98.
98. Chris?
99.
99. I graduated in 1974. Greatest year ever, right? No, I would. I'm going to tell you, there's a lot that both of you have said that would go with me. I mean, I remember wondering how I fit in, but I had a very wide group of friends, and I think, Mike, as you listed who was in your group, my group was like that as well. I mean, I remember sitting with peers, who played football and basketball guys, but it wasn't the wide variety of those guys. It was that for some reason I was with the guys who were a bit more academic, and that was not me. I was fearful of, flunking out of high school and not doing well, and, things like math and physics and chemistry. Oh, I don't know how I ever got through those things. It just, I was more into, the history thing. When I say into, just getting it done. I was not like a buff on that stuff. So I don't know how I wound up with those guys. A lot of Jewish friends. That's what happens when you grow up outside of Philadelphia, where I grew up. And, a lot of guys that I spent time with outside of school, but also my youth group friends. That was really my place of safety and security, because I was in a church youth group, and it was a strong group. I'm still in touch with a lot of those folks, guys and girls both, and so that was influential in my life in some big ways. Let me ask you this: if you were wearing a logo T-shirt in high school, because some brands and things, we say that we brand ourselves now. I don't like that language. We're people, and this ties into our conversation today, Mike, on what it means to be made in the image of God. We try to remake ourselves, and we brand ourselves according to brands, and marketing loves to do that, certainly now more than ever before. But it was bad back then when you guys were in high school and when I was in high school. But if you were wearing a logo on a shirt, what would it have been? Do you remember?
Oh, yeah. Easy.
I think, all right, it's New England Patriots?
No.
Oh,
actually.
really? Okay.
So remember, I grew up in the 90s when the Patriots were like the Jets. Like they were just bad.
Yeah.
Well, my high school years, we had Bledsoe. So we did make it to a Super Bowl and got absolutely trounced, if you remember that. But for most of my life, the Pats were just horrible. So everyone rooted for the Patriots and had a secondary team. And I just loved Joe Montana and Jerry Rice and Steve Young. So I was a big 49ers guy. So if I was wearing a logo on my shirt, it was probably a 49ers jersey.
Yeah.
I was kind of known as the 49ers guy.
Okay.
I had this red and black and gold 49ers baseball cap that I would wear constantly.
So that was a lot of your identity back then.
It was
like
actually,
yeah.
Chris, I was known as the 49ers kid. Yeah.
Chris, I'm thinking there's a punk band.
There's a few. If I had to pick a brand, there was a brief period of time where, in order to try to fit in, I was wearing some Nike stuff for a little bit, but mostly we couldn't really afford the Nike stuff that often, so I didn't have much of it. That was really just because I was trying to fit in. But then, outside of that, it would have been I was known for my Yankees hat.
Yeah.
I didn't go anywhere in high school without my New York
and I'm going to
Yankees
tell
hat.
people why, because I've seen that hat.
Yeah.
You would leave home without it, and it would walk on its own to school, right?
It's still walking.
It's foul.
It is.
Yeah.
Yes. And then it was. I was also then known. I would wear a band T-shirt every single day of the week in high school, various bands and whatnot. So
yeah. Okay. I think mine would be shoes. But because this was back then, and you mentioned like Nike, and I remember when Adidas really first became popular. I was in middle school. The three stripes. In fact, I was looking at somebody posted on a Facebook group a page from a Sears Christmas catalog from 1970, and I remember the Sears brand of shoes. They created shoes that looked just like Adidas shoes, but with 4 stripes, not 3. Which just can you do that now? Is that legal? But Converse, the black high top Chuck Taylor All Stars, and that was the shoe back then, and it's been
it's
fun
the
to
shoe
watch.
again.
I know, it's
school.
crazy. Yeah, so I guess I was ahead of my time. But that, and then I think with my shirts, maybe there. A lot of alligators on my shirts, so which was a big part of where I grew up. But all right, so
so I also need to throw out some love for Rush. So I was known for 2 things in high school: for the 49ers and for my love for Rush. So shout out to Rush. Very excited that they're reuniting for.
You're on the young side for Rush, I would say.
I am, but I'm the youngest of 4.
Okay.
So my older siblings were big Rush fans, and then we all got in. So, me and my siblings were all going to see Rush together.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's an interesting. I never heard Rush till I was a freshman in college, and my next door in the room in the apartment next door at Geneva. Yeah. A guy was.
I tell
playing
people
Rush
all the time. I've learned more about postmodern philosophy from Rush than I have from any philosophy book or any philosophy course I've ever taken.
Okay.
Their song lyrics are just very deeply philosophical, and they taught me what postmodernism is.
Yeah, so the first Rush song I ever heard that grabbed me, that I was aware of, because they weren't being played on the radio the way, we didn't have the internet with all that, but it was, do you remember Fly By Night? Oh, yeah. Just captured me. It was like, wow, that is an awesome song. And I've read Neil Peart's, I don't know if he says Peart or Peart, who passed away, his 2 memoirs, which are fascinating, a fascinating study in just trying to find, identity, meaning and purpose in life. They're great. His motorcycle rides and things. I probably should pull them off the shelf and read them.
He's got a few of them.
Cue them up again. 4. Yeah. Passed away a few years ago, so that was quite a drummer if you look at him online. So let me transition here a little bit, and I want to ask you, Mike, just about Youth Pastor Theologian. If people are not familiar with Youth Pastor Theologian, talk about that, what you're doing, and really what motivated you. What is it behind that? To get you to start that ministry, because I know with us starting Center for Parent Youth Understanding, there was a passion that grew into a calling. The vision behind Youth Pastor Theologian, or YPT, is that we're advocating for theological renewal in youth ministry, because we believe that youth ministry is theological ministry. Right? That youth ministry is theological ministry. Youth pastors teach, youth pastors preach, youth pastors counsel, they disciple, they evangelize, they recruit volunteers and train and equip volunteers. They do, right? That as a youth pastor, what you are doing is real, genuine biblical ministry. At the same time, so many youth pastors tend to look for tips and tricks for how to do ministry well, without really ever pausing to ask questions like, what is youth ministry? Like, biblically speaking, is youth ministry in the Bible? And how have Christians always passed on the faith from generation to generation? So what can we learn from that? And how does that shape and guide the way that we're doing youth discipleship, youth evangelism today? There's just lots of voices in the broader ministry atmosphere saying, hey, youth pastors, your kids can learn trigonometry and algebra, and they're taking all these AP classes, but when they come to youth group, you're dumbing everything down. They can learn theology. Youth pastors teach kids theology. But it just always felt a bit like a gotcha to me.
and not like an actual hopeful statement, because the same people who say that very rarely, if ever, helped youth pastors be able to teach theology to students, right? So like if you want to teach about the Trinity to teenagers, which is kind of a big deal, right? Like believing in the Trinity, that's what it means to be a Christian. How do you teach that to a middle schooler whose ADHD meds have worn off? And if there's no resources to help you be able to do that, then how do we hold it against youth pastors that they're not doing that?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what is the difference between um, your faith and other friends who are going to more liberal or progressive churches? And um, how do we distinguish and differentiate and really have clarity about what we believe, and even just what is a Christian? That is a theological question.
Yeah.
So sometimes people say, oh, I just want to teach them Jesus and lead them to Jesus, and we don't want to get into theology because that's just confusing, or theology divides or whatever. We just want to focus on Jesus. Well, okay, what does that mean? Like, who is Jesus?
Yeah.
What did he do? Those are theological questions.
Yeah, and a lot of this is just
So,
grounding students in the faith, a
yeah.
faith that will inform life. And I think a lot of what you're doing as well, and we're committed to this here at CPYU, is to take youth pastors deeper, because you said something earlier that youth pastors are theologians. Whether
Yep.
you are pursuing that, calling consciously, or you're just sort of easing into that unconsciously and not really thinking about that, we all teach theology. And
Yep.
I want to be more intentional about that. I want to be conscious of that, and I want to work to that. I often share the story of someone I'll leave unnamed who was leading a national ministry and had a couple of us come in and say, I want you to listen to my presentation here at this conference, and then I want to sit with you and tell me, am I saying the things correctly? And it really kind of shocked me that somebody who leads would not have really done the due diligence ahead of time. And then when I asked about theology and how do you study theology, and that the answer was pretty curt, and it was, I don't do theology. And it was more about, I want to resource youth workers, and I want to lead kids to Jesus. And so you and I know that that's well-intentioned, right? That's well-intentioned,
Yeah, it
but
is.
misinformed. Yeah. And what the problem now is that we, and people have heard me say this over and over on our podcast, the problem is culturally in the church now, we detach justification from sanctification functionally, and you can't do that. There is, as R.C. Sproul has said, I mention this all the time, there is no justification without sanctification. And so this is one reason why I, do appreciate, what it is that you're doing. Can you say something, Mike, just a word of encouragement to youth workers about how we spend our time? Because a lot of it is, as you've said, like tips and tricks, and let's go online and download this and do this. And we don't even, in many respects, prepare our own messages anymore. We're using pre-prepared things that, to me, that's troubling, because if it doesn't come out of your own study and the way that the Lord is working in your life and ministering to you and leading you to grow in sanctification, passion's not there. Passion has to drive our ministries. Can you say something about the importance of education? And we could be talking about formal theological education, or we could just be talking about good reading to prep ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you wait until kids ask good, hard questions to start digging into the topics that those questions are about, then you're going to have nothing to say when they ask those questions. So you want to be prepared, right? I tend to be slow about you need to type of statements, because there's always 1,000 of those, and you can't do everything. But if you want to lead a biblically rich, theologically robust, but pastorally simple, pastorally clear, pastorally helpful ministry to youth, then the deeper your well, the more you'll have to draw from it.
Yeah.
and you want to dig your well into God's word, not just into youth culture, so that you can relate to kids better. And are we just so enmeshed in youth culture and in the world that our kids live in that we don't have much to offer them from God's word and from the life that God is calling them towards?
Yeah. Yeah, I love, I think back to the quote I share all the time, and I talk to parents about this, fill your well. I talk to youth workers, fill your well. Because if your well's not filled, your students are going to die of thirst. And, that's the way that I state it. But I think about John Stott, who talks about dual listening, that we need to listen to both the word and the world. We have consequent obligation to listen to both. And we listen to the world and the culture, not to be shaped by that, but to have our delivery of the word and the translation of our study into the realities that exist. So this is good. So you tell us just a little bit before we take a break. I just want you to give us a little bit of an introduction to this book on identity, Iconic, Being God's Image in Your World.
Yeah, Iconic is part of a new book series published by Spurgeon College and New Growth Press, talking about real world theology. So how do we take biblical themes from biblical theology and apply that and make it accessible for youth and young adults? And so they invited me to contribute to that series, and right away it wasn't even a hard decision. I want to talk about Imago Dei. I want to talk about the image of God. It is the foundational issue that I think youth and young adults need to be hearing about. It's not a very sexy topic. It's not the topic that's going to sell the most books, unfortunately. But it is at the root behind so many of the issues and challenges that our teenagers and young adults are facing. I heard someone recently talk about their job in aerospace engineering, as their job is to figure out the why behind the why, so that when something goes wrong, my job is to discover what went wrong and why did it go wrong, and how do we resolve that so it never happens again. And so as I was hearing him talk about his job with airplanes and engineering, I thought, you know what, that's what Iconic is. Iconic is the why behind the why of so many of the issues that youth and young adults are facing. It is the foundational thing that we have lost that has led to so much brokenness in gender, sexuality, mental health, abortion, racism, social justice issues, you name it. It can be traced back to a loss of understanding of creation and Imago Dei.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, we're going to unpack a little bit more that's in the book. Mike's going to give us a little bit more of an introduction to that. We're going to take a break, and I want to mention to everybody that already we've talked about movies, we've talked about books, T-shirts, whatever else, anything that's of value that you might be interested in. Chris Wagner here at CPYU is going to put links to those things in the player beneath the player for this particular episode of Youth Culture Matters. So go to cpyu.org. You'll find the player there and scroll down and you'll find links. And we'll link to Youth Pastor Theologian as well and everything else we mentioned. So stick with us. We'll be right back. Our mission here at CPYU is to increase the ability of home and church to nurture children and teens into a lifetime of biblically faithful, whole-life Christian discipleship. That's why we've created our free weekly Youth Culture Field Report. It's a weekly resource filled with the latest youth culture news, research, trends, biblically sound analysis, and more. If you want to lead the children and teens you know and love through the rapidly changing world of today's youth culture, you need to subscribe to this free weekly resource. It's easy. Just go to cpyu.org and scroll down to find the subscription link. Subscribe to the CPYU Youth Culture Field Report today so that we can walk alongside you in your efforts to nurture kids in the Christian faith. So, as we continue to talk about the image of God and with Mike McGarry and about his book Iconic, I'm thinking about something, we've communicated here as we teach on all the matters that Mike mentioned beforehand related to identity. He was talking about sexuality, gender, the value of persons, racism, justice, all those different things that if we understand the flow of redemptive history from Genesis to Revelation, creation, fall, redemption, and restoration, the whole idea of biblical anthropology, or understanding what it means to be human, that's what biblical anthropology is, biblically speaking. Certainly the world gives us an agenda or a narrative on that, and that changes from time to time. And our kids are hearing it. They're being pounded with it through social media and other media as well. But when we look at biblical anthropology, we have to start with creation. So, Mike, can you use that Latin term imago Dei that may not be familiar to a lot of people, basically the image of God. Can you give us, just from the standpoint of creation, a simple statement about biblical anthropology and what we need to understand as the starting point for our conversations with our students about identity and even our own understanding of who we are?
Yeah. So I use the Latin phrase in conversation because your listeners are just so smart and knowledgeable. I'm sure they can follow. I don't know that I might reference that Latin phrase once in the book, but I really don't use it because it's for youth and young adults. But yeah, the message about the biblical image of God, that we are created in God's image, what that means is that we are living icons of God's glory and goodness in this world. That's what it means to be a human being. And it really gets down to what is a human, just biblically, theologically, practically. What is a human being? A human being is God's living icon of his glory and goodness in this world. And so when the Bible teaches that God made us in his image, male and female, he created them, the Greek word for image is the word icon, which is where I get the name of the book from, is iconic, that we are icons. We are living icons. And the reason why we don't make dead icons, otherwise known as idols, is because God already made an icon of himself. But it wasn't a dead icon. It wasn't carved in stone or out of wood. God made living icons. He breathed life into them and said, you are the light of the world. By your life, by your being, by your righteousness, by your holiness, by your goodness, you will shine and cast my glory and put my goodness on display into all creation. So it's not a sense of that, like I am just so glorious and you are just so glorious. Wow, isn't this amazing? It's a shared glory. It's a borrowed glory, but it's innate. It's embedded into what it means to be a human being. And so this is, I think, why there's still so much debate among philosophers and theologians. Are people basically good or are people basically bad? And I think a lot of that has to do with iconic, right? What does it mean to be created in the image of God? And in one sense, every single one of us we are in there inherently and innately good because we bear God's glory. We bear God's goodness. And it's what we are. So that even the worst sinner that you will ever experience and that you'll ever encounter is an image bearer of God. And yet, our sinful nature has corrupted our ability to bear God's image faithfully, so that by our indwelling sin, by our sinful nature, we take God's glory for our own glory, and we corrupt God's goodness and redefine it according to our own desires. And this is what the gospel restores in us. The gospel gives us new life. The gospel unites us with Christ by the filling of the Holy Spirit, so that we don't become something other than human. We actually according to the power of the gospel, we actually begin to fulfill our humanity so that we bear God's glory and goodness faithfully as his living icons in the world. And this is why Jesus says that we will be known by our good works, and people will see our good works and praise our Father who is in heaven. That is a very iconic image of God type of statement that Jesus makes there in Matthew 5.
So you hit creation, fall, or redemption there, and how that relates to who we are as divine image bearers. Obviously, we look at restoration, consummation, the end things, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we get to the last few chapters of Revelation, and we look at that and we understand that all things will be restored. So we are looking
and
towards
we'll still
that.
be human.
Yeah, we'll still be human.
Like in the new heavens and the new earth, we will still be human.
Right.
We're not going to become something other than human.
That is that, and that I don't know what I would love to know what percentage of people actually have that notion of heaven, which to me is well, to have the image of heaven that it's going to be the clouds, the wings, and all this crazy stuff that
we're all going to be
just
fat
is not
babies with wings.
Yeah, there's nothing biblical about that at all. There is nothing in my being that desires that. Nothing in my teenage years, if I thought that, what left me desiring that, I want to live in this world, because that's what I was made for, right? So it's an erroneous thing, and what will happen is the new heavens and the new earth, we will have bodies, will be restored, and we will be bearing God's image in the way we were originally intended to bear that. Now, let me back up there, because, okay, this is all good stuff that we need to teach our kids, but fleshing it out, think about back to creation. What would you say to youth workers about the need to talk about in the creation narrative the cultural mandate? To be fruitful and multiply, to image God, to make something of the world. That's where it really, kind of the old cliche, the rubber meets the road, where we have to teach our students how to live this out. Because otherwise we're just, we're kind of out there just sort of thinking. Right. So make some comments on that.
Yeah. I think that we just don't talk about creation often enough. And I'm going to be honest, I think part of it for me and my own experience and my own baggage maybe is so much of the hard driving, literal 7-day creation, new earth, old earth, evolution, intelligent design debates that I grew up in, where like that's all we talked about. So now we don't talk about it at all. And so I think there's a whole generation of youth workers who, when they hear you need to teach about creation, all they hear is you need to teach a literal 7-day creation. But teaching about biblical creation, Genesis 1 and 2, is so much more than talking about what were the days literal or figurative. You can teach a whole series about that and teach very briefly about how many hours was it. And so I think when we have a generation of youth workers who have that baggage and therefore hardly ever think about or talk about creation, it should not be surprising when something like expressive individualism grows up, where I am self-defining. My identity is a mystery that only I know how to unlock, this type of thinking. And instead, we need to be grounded in what God has said we are. And so, what is a human? What am I? And how in the world can I ever figure out who I am if I don't know what I am? And what God did in creation is he put man and woman, Adam and Eve, on the earth as his living icons. And he gave them the creation mandate, the cultural mandate to go forth and multiply, to exercise dominion over creation, to care for God's creation and to cultivate it, not for their own sense of goodness and not for their own glory, but as his living icons to care for and cultivate creation in a way that is in alignment with God's glory and goodness in this world. And so, yeah, do we think that getting married and having children is going to hold off my professional development? That's a conversation that is dicey, but is important to be having. How do I see uh, if students want to go into the sciences, is that a viable Christian career? That nursing and engineering and just molecular biology or astronomy, and right, these are expressions of the cultural mandate of caring for God's creation. Even teaching your dog to play fetch and teaching your dog tricks, like caring for God's creation. I think it's really helpful to talk about all these different vocations as expressions of the cultural creation mandate in Genesis 1, and how our identity as image bearers shapes the way we pursue and practice those vocations.
Yeah, this is good. I want to affirm that in the sense of going back to something you said, Mike, that we have lamented over and over on podcasts and when I speak places, and that is that in the church and in the youth ministry world, when we ask, what is motivating you? What is the tell us that the end game for your youth?
Yeah.
I just want to bring people to Jesus. Well, what does that mean? And you mentioned this earlier. Who is Jesus? Mm-hmm. What does it mean to come to Jesus? Because Jesus always says, right, come as you are, but he never says stay as you are.
Right.
And to rework the narrative that the culture is giving us, that you need to pursue leisure, you need to pursue, you mentioned expressive individualism, you need to pursue, success as it's defined culturally, which would be prominence, being an influencer, certainly the amount of money you get in your bank account, how early you can retire. To understand the Imago Dei, to understand what it means to be made in the image of God, changes all of that. And as you mentioned, just vocational instruction, teaching kids about vocation and calling, what it means to serve and glorify God through whatever pursuit we have. And we've said it before on here. It's not just those who go off to a university and come out with a degree and, some prominent position, but it's the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, the guy who picks up my garbage, the guy who is spreading mulch in people's yards. It is everything.
Yeah.
And God, all truth is God's truth, and all of us are divine image bearers, and with our giftedness and our calling, and that's where youth workers need to teach. So this meshes well with I was just talking about this weekend where I was speaking down in North Carolina. The work that David Kinnaman and Mark Matlock did in Faith for Exiles, where one of the 5 common threads for kids who become resilient disciples in their young adult years, sticking with the faith, growing in their faith, is training in vocation and calling, vocational discipleship. Yeah, vocational discipleship, which is, so important. And so we're all, and when it comes to culture, what this means is, in terms of being divine image bearers, we're all culture makers. God has called us to make culture. We're his vice regents. We're his I don't know if we'd say co-creators, but we have been given that responsibility by God to take what he's given us and make something of it. So, this is good.
The Bible begins in a garden and ends in a city.
Right.
Yeah. So, and I also think one of the biggest misunderstandings that I have encountered in the doctrine of the image of God is that most people hear the image of God and apply that to, human dignity, human worth. They apply that to racism and to gender and sexuality in various ways, to maybe something like abortion and euthanasia, and then they end. But the doctrine of the image of God shapes so much more than some of those more controversial issues, that it really is kind of the underlying story that holds up God's salvation and what it means. Why did God create us as human beings? Where do we come from? Where are we going? And therefore, how do we live today? So Iconic really covers and addresses that whole swath
Okay.
of how are we calling kids to live for Christ today.
Yeah, I want to take a break. It's a good time for a break. But when we come back and we finish up with our last segment, I want to ask you to hit a couple of those things
Sure.
to take us further beyond all that you just mentioned that is important, that is necessary, that is vital to the way that we look at ourselves and look at others in our place in God's world. But we're going to take a break here. We're talking to Mike McGarry from Youth Pastor Theologian about his book, Iconic. We'll be right back. Hey, youth workers, it's happening again. The 4th Annual Northeast Youth Ministry Summit will be held from March 16 to 19 in the beautiful Laurel Highlands of Pennsylvania at the Ligonier Camp and Conference Center. We invite you to join us for 4 days of deep and practical youth ministry training, shared meals, worship, and community building all around this year's theme of Every Square Inch. We've assembled an experienced group of youth ministry trainers and practitioners who will lead you into a deeper understanding of how to raise up a generation of students who live out their faith in every square inch and moment of their lives. We'll gather for 6 large group sessions, and you can choose from 20 breakouts. And there's a whole lot more. Visit nymsummit.org for more information and to register. That's nymsummit.org. No matter where you live and are doing youth ministry, I hope you'll join us at the 2026 Northeast Youth Ministry Summit. Well, if you haven't already discovered the parent prompts that we're putting out here at CPYU that are free, you can find them on our website. And it really is what Mike's talking about, what we're trying to do here on a regular basis, and that is take a cultural reality and apply biblical truth and biblical theology to those things in ways that are understandable. So we have our CPYU fellows are writing those. We're writing a lot of those internally as well. We'll take a cultural trend or even a theological reality. Tim McAlpine just wrote one on justification, and it's short, but it gives a good summary of how our world thinks about being justified and identity, but also what the Scriptures say. We go from the world to the Word, and then how we can have conversations about that is the third section, where we help parents and youth workers understand how to walk. And parents or youth workers, I want to say to you, grab these things. They're free. Download them and send them on to your parents as a resource to really help them out. And so as we think about, applying God's Word to the various issues of life, Mike does that in his book, Iconic, Being God's Image in Your World. And I know he mentioned, or we've mentioned things like in the past, like, well, creation, what does that have to say about sexuality? What does it have to say about gender? What does it have to say about work? Mike's hit some other areas here. And during the break, I asked him if he would be willing to talk about a couple of those. And I think, what was the first one, Mike? Community? You have a chapter in here on iconic community. What does it mean to have a good biblical anthropology, to understand the Imago Dei? What does that mean for community?
Yeah, I think it's so easy to hear that you were created as a living icon of God's glory and goodness only in the singular. But we as God's people are also created and called to bear God's image faithfully together. So in that chapter, I really draw out God's intention for Israel as a light to the nations. And how does that affect us as Christians in the church? How is that a model and a reminder for us about the corporate nature of image bearing? And how many people have we ministered to, have we talked about the gospel with, who have rejected Christ, not just because of Christ, but because of Christians? And I think it's really easy. And sometimes I hear people say, oh, well, don't deny Jesus because of Christians. You should only think about Jesus. And I get that. But also, Christians do bear witness to the one that we worship. So Does Jesus save? Does Jesus change us? Are we living in a way that represents and portrays our Savior faithfully, clearly, beautifully, with truth and grace, not truth or grace? And so, what does the corporate image bearing look like for our youth groups, for our church, for Christians in general? I think that's a really important conversation to have.
Yeah, good, and a good chapter there on that. So, and we want to, yeah, we don't want to lean into the fact that, yeah, well, we're broken people, so we're going to misrepresent Christ regularly. Look, you mentioned people who want to give up on the church or give up on Christ because of Christians, and truth be told, I mean, I've never gone that far to step over it, but I understand why people feel that way.
Totally.
Yeah, and probably guilty of perpetrating some of that myself. Okay, how about there's another chapter in here, iconic imitation. Talk about that.
Yeah. This might be my favorite chapter. My favorite chapter to write. So iconic imitation is really building off the gospel and saying, what does it mean for us to bear God's image as Christians? And that really is built around the communicable attributes of God and the fruit of the Spirit. And so there's two types of attributes of God, and those are things that are always eternally true about what God is like. So the attributes of God fall into categories of the communicable attributes and the incommunicable attributes. So the communicable attributes are things that are true of God that are also true of us as image bearers. Things that the incommunicable attributes of God are things that are true of God but are not true of us as image bearers. So I am not omnipotent. I am not sovereign. I am not omnipresent, right? Those are incommunicable attributes of God because they're true of him, but not of me. However, I am called to love, and I'm called to be patient, and I'm called towards holiness, right? So obviously these are things that are true of us to a lesser degree than they are of God. But this is what the gospel does in us. And so in this chapter, I look at the fruit of the Spirit because it's just a very biblical list of what the gospel does in us. What does the gospel do? What does it mean for us to be conformed to the image of Christ? And I don't think that Paul wrote the fruit of the Spirit with the communicable attributes in mind. That's not my argument. But my argument is that these fruit of the Spirit are things that the gospel does in us because it's making us more like our faithful God. It's conforming us in these communicable attributes. So when you think about love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, those are things that become true of us as Christians by the work of the Holy Spirit because they are true of God. And so in that chapter, I walk through kind of the attributes of God and the fruit of the Spirit and show how they theologically line up. And I just think it's a really helpful reminder that what the gospel is doing in us is conforming us to the image of Christ. It's making us fulfill our humanity as image bearers who share in the communicable attributes of God.
Yeah, so this is good, and what I want to piggyback on with what you just said, Mike, is, obviously in the book here you're giving us a good introduction to these things and how they fit together in the way that you just described. This is the kind of thing that I would say to youth workers, you need to go even go deeper. Like, Mike's pulling back the curtain on this, giving us something to think about. And each of these that you mentioned there, and you went through the list, the fruit of the Spirit, when we hear, this is the danger, right? We hear these things, and immediately we define them and think about how they would work themselves out functionally in a cultural way. Not like they're misdefined. And so this is where I like what you do. You go back, and I think we need to encourage all youth workers and parents as well to go back and do some deeper study on these things to disrupt the way we're thinking, to deconstruct the way we're thinking wrongly and look at these things biblically to see what they truly are.
Yeah.
And, to reorient ourselves to those. As I was leafing through this while you were talking, I hit the one on kindness, and what came to mind immediately, and Chris, we'll include a link to this, was that article I read about a year ago. I can't remember who wrote it, a youth pastor peer in Touchstone magazine on the idol of niceness, and that what we need to recover in the church is not niceness. We need to get rid of niceness as it's culturally defined. That's a misdefinition of kindness, but look for biblical kindness.
Yes.
And by the way, biblical kindness, that motivates us to tell the truth to our students, and that's a theological reality as well. And you address this here as you talk about the truth.
Yeah.
So this is good.
Yeah. I know that all sounds super heady and super theological, but it's really all about, do we want our kids to become more like Jesus? Right. So I the way I'm expressing it now to other youth workers might be a bit more theological than the way I write it in the book. It's probably more accessible for teenagers. But really it gets to the question, do we want to become more like Jesus? And what does it look like for us to call our students to become more like Jesus?
Yeah. And that's ultimately what this is all about. That's why we're having this conversation with Mike. Discipleship. We want to get beyond. I can't wave this flag enough. We need to get beyond the shallowness of being motivated, well-intentioned, but motivated to just bring people to Jesus. We need to know who Jesus is and what that means. What does it mean? Right. Not just to be justified, but to pursue sanctification, to mortify sin, to understand the flow of biblical history and redemption. Creation, fall, redemption, restoration, and what that means and how we live. And so that's why I really appreciate, Mike, not just what you're doing with YPT, Youth Pastor Theologian, but this is a great resource. And I want to tell youth pastors, you need to get this. Parents, you need to get this. Get it in the hands of your students. But even if you're not getting it in the hands of your students, read it yourself and teach from it. This is where, as I said earlier, this is not a curriculum per se, but it's good foundational stuff for you to study and pursue. Mike, I want to ask you, I asked you a question during the break because I think about this. I like to read a lot of theology books. I tend to pick up like novels that my wife's reading, and I get through about 10 pages, and then I drop it and I go back to a theology book. Just because to me, that's just rich. And for people who want to go deeper, are there any books? I thought of a few myself, and I'll mention one here. But are there any books that you found that maybe one that you could point people to if they want to go more deep into understanding what the image of God means for us?
Yeah. Can I cheat and share two?
Oh yeah, that's fine.
All right. So one would be Anthony Hoekema, his book In His Image. That's an old book. I think it's from the 70s.
Yeah. Hoekema, I believe.
Yeah. But read everything by him. He is one of my favorite theologians, just so rich and robust, but also clear. So In His Image by Anthony Hoekema.
That's one I have.
And then the other one that I would point to is a more recent book by Carmen Joy Imes. She teaches out at Biola, and her book Being God's Image. I think you can kind of see the influence of that in the subtitle of my own book. And she really drives hard about God's image is what we are. It's not just what we do. And so there are some disagreements that I take with her. So I don't agree with everything in there, but I think she offers a really unique perspective that is very helpful. And she also writes very accessibly for the everyday Christian about what it means to bear God's image.
Yeah. Yeah,
or to be God's image.
That's good. That's good, and we'll include links to those. The one that I'd add to it, we talked about during the break, and it's from more of a what we would call a continental theologian, right? Somebody from across the pond, Philip Edgecombe Hughes, who passed away years ago, wrote a book called The True Image: The Origin and Destiny of Man in Christ, and it's rich, and it's not one you're going to sit down and read in one sitting. It's one that I've been working back through over time, a few pages at a time, just sitting. And that's the way I think about good theology, Mike, right? That when we get into reading theology textbooks, which I know sounds crazy to some people, but it's so necessary. You're stopping every paragraph and just trying to savor what was said there. I think about one of our profs back at Gordon Conwell, David Wells. And his sharp knowledge of culture and his ability to bring the light of God's word to bear on that theologically, his books are just so good that way, where you read a paragraph and you stop and you go, "What did I just read? That is amazing." So I want to encourage, and this is one of the things Mike's about, is trying to encourage youth pastors. You are a theologian, as he said earlier, so make sure you're doing good theology, biblical theology, that you're working that out in practice. And so, study theology, fill your well, as Mike said. So this is good. So the book is iconic, by Mike McGarry, Being God's Image in Your World. We invite you to check that out. Check out Youth Pastor Theologian. I know that Mike's putting up some curriculum there that we would trust, because it's not made to be flashy. It's made to be full, is the way I would think about it. And so, you might not run across it and look at it and say, compared to everything else, wow, man, it's well done, Mike. I'm not saying it's not well done, but it doesn't have the flash that others have. And by the way, that's what I'm drawn to.
I'm not big on bells and whistles.
Yeah,
I'm not offended by anything you're
we
saying.
need to get away from some of that.
Yeah.
We need to, meat is meat. And it's not the wrapper it's in that should attract us, but it's what's inside. And so
I like to jokingly tell people I'm pretty sure I would bet my house that it is the only curriculum for teenagers that has a whole lesson on the line, "He descended into hell" in the Apostles' Creed, and kids love it because they've heard this line their entire lives.
Yeah.
And no one has ever talked about it with
or the Holy Catholic Church, right?
Right.
So that's Anyway, but this is good. Thanks, Mike, and we appreciate Mike being with us. I want to again say, go to the player for this episode at cpyu.org and scroll down. Chris Wagner's going to put all sorts of things in there. Maybe we'll include a map from the movie Mean Girls, where each of us will be seated at the appropriate table that we sat at in the cafeteria when we were 16 years old. I love asking those questions, Mike, and the background of everybody is great. So thanks for sharing that. So for everybody who's listening, thank you for listening in, and we will catch you on the next episode of Youth Culture Matters.
Thanks for joining us for Youth Culture Matters, a podcast from the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding. If you'd like to learn more about today's youth culture, visit our website at cpyu.org. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, email us at podcast@cpyu.org.